you are a carrier of some wisdom tradition here that seems to address this big question. Can you give it to me in a nutshell? He's asking. And so he starts by reaffirming that the reason why this person's asking is the reason why all Buddhas become Buddhas or all Bodhisattvas become Bodhisattvas is because there's a problem with human existence, and that problem is the impermanence of it, and that we know it's impermanent, and this is a troubling, deep, profound rub. And most of our lives are defined by how we deal or avoid that issue. So he says, this is it. This is why one addresses it. This is the one great matter. And in a sense, he's framing it. If you're not interested in this, don't listen to the rest. It's almost like, I'm not here to lure you in or entice you or promise you pleasant things. I'm saying if you're really serious, if you're really looking at life deeply, you've already addressed this in some way. It's already gnawing at you. And because you have that, I'm going to talk straight to you. I'm going to give it to you straight. And he says, okay, here it is. This great matter is to address two things. One is this dissatisfactoriness, this rub we feel, and the other thing is that there is something intrinsic and whole and complete in us called an enlightened or awakened nature. And the problem is we can't get to that directly because we've covered it over. So that's that first paragraph, and he gives us what we covered over. Craving, deluded thinking, emotional anxiety, and great habits obscured this wonderful brightness. So he's right away posing almost the same statement the Buddha makes upon his enlightenment. All beings have this wondrous, bright, pure, enlightened nature, and all can attain it. It's not limited, but we cover it over. Now you're going to see this occur again and again. Then he goes on, and he describes how not only we cover it over, but we cover it over habitually. We cover it over day after day, week after week, and in this sense, life after life. And he says, therefore, we become confined within a kind of prison of our own making, a prison of our own self-limiting potential. And it's sad. And this sadness of that condition is at the heart, too, of why bodhisattvas remain in the conditioned realm, because they themselves knew that themselves, and they also realized that other people are caught in this sadness. And so there's a compassion that arises to break people out of this sadness. This sadness you could call depression. This sadness you could call what Thoreau did in the former quote, quiet lives of desperation, quiet lives of hopeless kind of despair, where meaning and purpose is ever on the margins, and every time we reach for it, it's really not solid, and that we go on, though, and pretend that it's there, but it's really not there. And so there's this kind of tension with going on, leading our lives, trying our best, but realizing without some deep access to something with profound meaning, we know it's a game, we know it's a shadow, we know it's not real. And so the despair has to do not only with the feeling of the sad, hopeless, but also with knowing that we're covering it over. And this becomes, at some point, for some people, unpalatable. There's a tension that builds up and you don't want to be there anymore. So he says, then the Buddha comes, or teachers come, and give Dharma. But Dharma is nothing at all except an expedient to break us out of this illusory sadness or despair we've gotten ourselves into because we've covered over this true nature with devices meant to address the problem that really don't address the problem. And in the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha calls this as using dukkha to end dukkha, or trying to end suffering with suffering. So we make a mistake at a fundamental level, and that mistake he's going to explain tonight where the heart of that mistake is. And once we make that mistake, our lives start to go out more and more covering over this brightness with the hope of solving this problem. But in fact, we don't solve the problem that way, we become further away from it. Okay. So then he says, all you have to do is come back to the present mind where the fulcrum, where this movement is occurring. Even though it's habitual, it's still occurring in a moment-to-moment thing, and you can get a handle on it there. Come back to the heart where it's burning, where it's being created. Then he says, if you can, And now he's giving a formula. If you can stop this deluded thinking, you will immediately see your true mind. This is awakening. And there's nothing more to cultivate. Now, he gives it simply because it is simple, but he also is going to go on to say it's not that simple. In other words, theoretically it's simple. But the complexity is not in that. The complexity is in us. We've made it very, very complex. And the smarter we are, the more complex we made it. Let me repeat that. We have complicatedly, in beautiful, exquisite, ornate ways, covered over our nature. So much so that it doesn't have any chance of shining forth. We've actually kind of, I was watching a documentary on ancient sword making, and to melt the metals down, they put it into a pot, and then they seal that pot so tightly that nothing can get in at all. I mean, and then they put that into the center of charcoal. And so the heat gets so intense, and there's nothing that can get in, it just melts that. In the same way, our habit energies, our calculations, our covering overs are that tight there's nothing that can get in. It seems as a hardened mass. So he says, and then he gives an example. He says, the true mind is like a mirror. Okay, we covered it over. That's one example. Mental constructions, this construction that he talks about, it's some scar, it's the forming. This activity that we do to cover ourselves over, to lock ourselves into habitual patterns of mind and body and thought that are actually just illusory, unreal, untrue, not our true self. These constructions cover over and occlude the mirror. Moving forward. If we can stop this, if we can stop this process of construction, the mirror will manifest just as you cleansed away the dust. This is what Dharma is all about. Okay, now we come into tonight's passage. So where he's going to go to next is very interesting. He's saying, okay, here it is. It's very simple, yet we've done this masterful job of tying ourselves into knot and covering over that bright nature. The Dharma is meant to actually address those covering constructions, to untie them, to unravel them, for us to see them, as my teacher would say, see through them and put them down. Do not tie them up again. Do not reconstruct that edifice that you've hidden yourself in. So this is what Dharma is about. It's to address that. Now, when he says what he's going to tonight is there's two ways that one can go wrong or miss it. Now, already we've come a long distance. If you think about where you are here, this is not simple stuff. If you've gotten to this point, then you're ready to listen to, well, if I really want to do this, how do I do this? But you'd have to go on through all that came before that. And when I say that's not simple, you'd have to have done some sort of deep confrontation and some true looking at yourself and your life. And so there's a kind of process where getting real is a prerequisite for entering this. Getting real, I mean really looking at things. My teacher would say, open your eyes and really take a look at the world and take a look at yourself. And once you do that, you start to get a prep or a predisposition now to say, give me something real in response. Okay, the unexamined life is not worth living, said Socrates. Okay, but are you gonna, if I start to examine it, is it worth living? You know, there's an element of faith here. And the teacher would say, don't worry, your examination will be rewarded by knowledge, by insight, and by liberation. However, if you can't get to that point, the examined life is not something you're going to take up. Because one of the reasons why we don't take up the examined life is because initially we were so afraid of confronting the truth that we covered it over. So part of the covering is to protect ourselves from facing the examined life. That's why in beginning philosophy classes, as soon as you say the unexamined life is not worth living, you have to look at yourself. Everybody goes, whoa, I didn't mean to take this class. I'm out of here. How is this going to advance my career? So immediately people bail at that point because we actually don't want to do that. So the Buddha did not go out and say, hear ye, get in your face. He said, no, no, no. Man, the psychological apparatus of recovering and denial are so strong, it doesn't matter. Just leave people alone. You know, you're suffering. Screw you, you know, get out of my face. I don't want to. It's only when you hear and know it in yourself that you're interested in saying, I feel this, I'm willing and I want to examine this. Now, why do I want to examine this? Oh, I'm curious. Okay, so you're curious, you want to examine it. That's cool. Or I want to examine it because I'm desperate. Because I really looked at it and there's nothing there. And I want to make sure of something. So I'm willing to leap into the unknown to examine that which is difficult to examine. Because the alternatives I've looked at, I find wanting. So sometimes most people don't come out of curiosity. I'm wondering, you know, I got a few minutes here. Is there any meaning to life? You know, no. You come to it because you've actually, in your own way, played at the margins of meaning. You probed into things, money, wealth, fame, power, relationships, elixirs of immortality, what do you got? And every one of them go pop, 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 just like bubbles. And you're going, whoa, I see a pattern here. And you get to a point where out of sheer exhaustion, playing with toys, you realize, okay, time to get real. Or you go into something else. And the Buddha says people do go into something else. They go into a kind of destructive hedonism. They go into some quest for clinging to themselves, or they sink into oblivion. In other words, the third thirst, the third craving, is to cut off sensation and feeling to the point that nothing touches you. So therefore you feel as if you're impervious, you're immune to suffering because you've now cut it off completely, and it's a form of oblivion. The Buddha said this is also a kind of thirst. And he warned, he said, of course, this can be done by slow suicide, by the numbing of your body and senses through drugs and alcohol and so forth, or even in a kind of meditation, that you see your meditation as a withdrawal from reality that insulates you from all troubles and worries. It's almost like a legal drug of numbing. He said meditation used in that way will not lead to liberation. So, anyways, many of the disciples that came in reiterate the Buddha's own experience, which is only after pushing on the margins of things that seem to have meaning and popping those and popping through them, not because they themselves destroyed them, but because these things could not stand up to the light of any purpose or meaning. So when those things started to collapse, the Buddha then said, whoa, I'm out of here. I have to do something else. I have to get out of the situation because I've surrounded myself with false supports, false life, false meanings, false everything. And he said, I'm like a bug in a web of my own construction here. And everything I touch and turn to, I see through it. It's impermanent, it's not true, and there's nothing to it. Now, if you look at many of the case stories, both in the monks and the nuns, and those of you interested in reading about the nuns, it's called the Therigatha, which are the songs or verses of the early nuns that came forth. And I think more sometimes in the nun stories than in the monks, do you see narratives, very compelling narratives and voices of people that have done it all and seen through it and now are coming on this moment of having cut off everything else. They're coming because they haven't, not because they're afraid of life or they're trying to escape reality, but they're coming because they delved into reality to its depths and found it wanting. So these are not like goody-goodies. These are people that have really lived life fully and survived enough to realize it's empty. Now, one of the dangers of living life fully is that you don't survive. You say, oh, I haven't had this. I wonder what death is like. I haven't had that experience. Well, you have it once, but then you don't say, that wasn't what it was all, and like, no, it's over. So you can't, as they say in the 60s, for the branches to reach to heaven, the roots have to reach to hell. That's a kind of, careful with that. You know, you don't have to reinvent a certain kind of experience. You can kind of extrapolate a little and figure out where it's going. You all know what I mean? That was, no, of course you don't. You're too young. That's good you don't. In any event, these people came not because they wanted to believe in religion, not because they were looking for a salvation through someone else to stand in for them, and not because they were afraid of life, but because they had actually deeply experienced and encountered this, and therefore were ready for this. Now, if you haven't come to that point yet, if you haven't started to feel a kind of emptiness at the edges of stuff, then you won't be interested in this. And if you're really trying to escape reality, man, this is not the stuff. So I know there's a theory out there that religion is an attempt by people to escape reality, but not this stuff. So this is the last material you want to come to if that is the goal. Because what is implied here is that you're not only willing, but you have already faced a certain amount of reality. Okay? So now he goes in and he says, two things then prevent us once we have the resolve from going forward. One is our own accumulated habitual confusion. It's heavy, it's deep. Even if we see through things out there and we know it's not true and real, our ability to get there is so encumbered, so tied up with what he calls unwholesome tendencies, habituations, and so forth. That's the first thing. So he's going to address this one. Maybe we'll get past this tonight of saying we are, you know, in a sense, we self-destruct. Okay? We have so much accumulated stuff here that once we take it on, we drown in our own afflictions. Okay, and that's why this message comes forth in a martial sense, that it takes a great hero to swim against this current. The next thing he'll say is, even if you're able to deal with this, you actually need a right method to practice. There's an actual right way to do this. And then the second part of this we'll go into how people go wrong. Their resolve is there. They're seeing through things. They're ready to go. They're even courageous enough to deal with all the garbage. However, the method they use is not effective. I'm talking very much in a pragmatic sense here. It's not an effective method, and therefore, no matter how long they apply it, it doesn't penetrate. The Shrangama Sutra says that the method has to be a blend of Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna. Okay, and the text says if you're lacking one of these elements, it's like cooking sand hoping to get rice. Now, you can have an exquisite 6-burner stove that sells out for $20,000, right? And you can have the best oils and the most modulated heat controls and the most exquisite stainless steel whatever pot. And you get it on the stove and you got the real gear. You got the apron, you got the chef's hat, you got everything, all the knives, and you know, millions of dollars in your kitchen, and you're gonna make this sweet sticky rice that you've heard about. And you put sand in the pot, okay? You can cook it, you can time it, you can do everything. It's never gonna be sweet sticky rice because it was sand to begin with. In the same way, a method that is not a correct method will not produce that. The Shrangama gets a little more graphic. It says, you want to have some chandala incense smell, but you're burning dry turds. So that's a little more graphic. You will never get the chandala incense smell because the substance that you're burning, no matter how many times you bow to it and put it into a reverential jade pot, it's still not going to be that wonderful fragrant incense, sinking in water incense, because to start with, it was just horseshit dried. So method then comes back to you have to have a right method. We may not get to method tonight, but let's get to habits.
Mark,
Yes.
could you please give us the graphic description, explanation of the Xi? Because last night during the meeting, you remind me how beautiful this word is. I almost forgot from that angle to look at this word. The
Shi chi to shi.
Yes, it's the wings.
The wings of a bird. Yeah. Well, we'll get unchecked over time. However, so I'll lead into this. So he's saying, it's very simple, it's very straightforward, it's happening in thought after thought. However, and here we go, unchecked over time. This is called learning, okay? Learning is accumulated habits that are unchecked over time. What learning theory, modern learning theory, teaches us that almost all our behaviors are learned, either through negative reinforcement or positive reinforcement. What we do is a learned, acquired way of behaving. Okay? And so changing those behaviors is also a learning process. So he's saying we are the teachers and we are the students both. Unchecked over time, the unwholesome tendencies habituate, harden, and solidify. In other words, we become accomplished. Look at it. When you started out at 2 or 3 years old, you were awkward, vulnerable. You hadn't habituated and hardened. But now look how accomplished we are. I'm saying this with a certain irony, okay? So in order to enter the way again, you have to soften and dehabituate and get down again as a child. Because what we've accomplished is actually the hardening habituation. At the root of this is self-clinging. Now this is where we're going to go tonight. But the habituation, is that what you want to go to? That word that we translated. So in Chinese, Shiqi, but the Shi is actually a pictograph and it shows 2 wings of a bird. So the way I think of it is a hummingbird. Everybody here seen hummingbirds? There's hope. There's hope. Yeah, I saw one on the Discovery Channel. No, I don't mean that. You actually look at a real hummingbird. Okay? Can you see the wings flap? No. What do you see? You just see a blur, right? Why? How many times did they flap a second? Very good answer. A lot. Sometimes up to 125. A second. Yeah, a second. Okay? So there's, wow, you know, that's why they have to eat a lot. I don't have to eat as much because I don't flap anywhere near that. But because they use that immense energy to flap, you don't see their wings. It's only when you take a special camera and time lapse and you can slow it down, you can see the movement of their wings. So the Chinese, in developing the word for habituation coming from the Sanskrit, used a pictograph, Shiqi, and it's really wonderful. It means have an energy. Qi, Shiqi, have an energy. And energy is really good because it sort of implies like a river now flowing on energy. There's energy there, but where is the river's energy coming from? You know, how does the energy, so that's what habit energy is, but the Shi is the flapping of the wings. So the top characters show the bird's wings, and you can't see it. It's so fast, and it's happening so automatically. So this is like total reflex. We have habituated to the point that we no longer see the movement of our own wings. And that's what I mean we're accomplished. Just as now we can walk. A couple days ago, I was watching a kid in the neighborhood take her first steps. And it was wonderful. It was like, you're going, man, the kid should get a Nobel for this. This is so hard. Well, and trying to stand up and finally getting up, you know, like this and going left and right. And then, you know, stepping away from the, you know, the chair and taking that first step, you know, and then boom, down. And then getting up again and doing it again and again. And then I'm sitting there and some spandex-clad 27-year-old comes jogging by. And I look and the kid's looking like, am I ever going to do that? You know, because the gap between that first step and jogging down a hill, you know, it's like amazing. But once that becomes accomplished, we don't think about it anymore. The wings just fly. We walk with balance. We don't think about it. We're accomplished. So in many ways, it's good, right? Playing the piano. When Gwyneth comes here to play the piano, why can she play it with such alacrity and speed? Because over practice, over time, her neurobiophysical structure completely became like the birds' wings, and their fingers know where their next note is without having to go, I think the next note is there, like I do. It's just zoom, like that. That's shichi. That's accomplishment. So I'm not putting it down, I'm saying at the same point, our bad habits and unwholesome tendencies also get accomplished. And so we're stuck with a mix here. Now, just as it's hard to go back to those first steps, right? Even if I push you, you regain your balance. You're cool. You do it. Because it's hard to break once you've habituated how to stand up and lose your balance. In the same way, the habitual tendencies and bad habits and faults also are hard to break. So she is a wonderful pictograph for that experience. The root is self-clinging. This is the war, and in Sanskrit, it's the basic teaching of anatta. Atta being self, an meaning not self. Okay, so now we're getting into the heart of this. What's at the root of all this habituation? It is what's called a notion of self, an idea of self. Now, really be careful here, because it's very easy for people to think, oh, that not self means nothing. Nothing whatsoever. There's no self. And then they slip into this kind of various stages of nihilism, or thinking they're good Buddhists because they're into self-effacement and self-denial. Okay? That's not what this is about. This is talking about something more profound. And it's saying there is a notion of self that we develop at a very, very deep level, that only after long practice and meditation you begin to even get close to the origins of that is brought about by a stirring of anxiety, desire that comes from misperception. And it's so fast, it's so quick, it's so deep that we mostly never catch it. And because we don't catch it, that little idea, that little turning, which is not substantial at all, it's more wispy than a molecule. It's like it's not even an idea exactly. An idea has more reality than this turning, and that's the phrase they use, it's a turning. Once this starts, and we go down that road, this is where all the habituation then covers over to make a self. So the clinging to this is what's being described here. It's a very psychological description. And so over time, this little thing, which isn't really anything at all, but a false thought. Okay, it's not don't mistake it for what is called true self. This is very different. This is the conditioned self that we think we are, me and what belongs to me. And the Buddha said this is at the heart of the problem. But because we've covered it over, we've lacquered it, we've polished it, we've built a whole house around it, it seems to us to be real and solid. And it's very hard to get at this. This is what the habituated tendencies are referring to. The construction of this psychological non-truth. It's a dream, it's illusion, and yet we cling to it tenaciously. We really cling to it tenaciously. The problem, the Buddha said, one of the problems with suffering is nobody else clings to it tenaciously. You cling to yours and I cling to mine, but I don't cling to yours. I know you're impermanent. I know you're going. I invest in you in a very light way. I do not put all my chips in your basket. You too will pass. You too will pass. But me, all the chips go here. That's how we think. It's the ultimate delusion. No scientist would look at this and say, tell me what's sane about this. This is totally insane. But it doesn't matter to us whether it's sane, because this becomes the pattern. We don't care if it's insane. It feels good. Right? So we construct this self. But the Buddha said the problem was that the natural world and the larger reality does not support it. And so we're always in conflict. Much of our suffering is brought about trying to insist and maintain this illusion in the face of realities that constantly affront it, challenge it, insult it, and eventually chip and wither it away. As much as you went down to the ocean and made this beautiful sandcastle. Me and mine, my castle. And then the tide starts coming in. And the tide says, ooh, sandcastle. Ooh, I think I'll go around it, preserve it. And it just sucks it away and it's gone. There's nothing, and this sandcastle is a perfect metaphor for the self. So, time, remember the Shakespeare sonnet we did? This thought is as a death which cannot choose but weep to have that which it fears to lose. I've seen how rust and time take everything away. Oh, it'll come to take my love away. Oh. And so the Buddha is going at this, he's saying, wouldn't you kind of in a rational way, for no other reason, look at this and say, hey, I don't think I'm going to last forever. Nothing else does. But we don't do that. This is called Wu-Ming. This is called ignorance. And the Buddha said, this is the self-clinging. So we cling to this idea. We hold on to it against all reality. We don't care about reality. It's like political debates. People don't care about the facts. Don't bother me with the facts, right? It's the feelings, it's the emotion. And so we live 99% of our time in a delusional emotional state of feeling. And we call ourselves rational beings. Homo sapiens. We're not. We're completely driven by these things. We use reason as part of the construction mechanism to support the ego. We rationalize, but we don't reason. So this is why people don't stop smoking, even though it causes cancer. It doesn't have anything to do with rational. It has everything to do with emotional needs and cravings and habits and everything. This is, I'm sorry, if you had a view of human nature as being this highly reasoned animal, forget it. Now, we are, I am, you're not. You are, but she's not. She is, but you're not. Now, that's how we think. And our reasons are impeccable. Our reasons stand up to the light of science and objectivity, where other people are leading delusions and so on and so forth. That's how the ego works. It not only sets up this false house, and then it convinces you that it's a rock of Gibraltar, that'll last forever. Others will crumble, but not yours. And we don't even have the beginnings of reason to see through that. It's amazing. So, when he says shichi, self-clinging, he's saying you put these two together and you have a very difficult thing to deconstruct. He says, fortunately, however, there's two things. We have within us this fragrant seed of inherent wisdom. That's the metaphor he uses. We have an inherent capacity for wisdom inside, and outside, if we're lucky, we meet a Kalyana Mitra, which we translate as a good knowing advisor, roughly. But this means a spiritual, wise teacher, mentor, friend. It's not your boyfriend or girlfriend, okay? It's not your soulmate, okay? And often the good advisor is a pain in the butt, or as Socrates says, a gadfly. You know what a gadfly? Anybody know gadfly? A gadfly is, always bugging you. Oh, the gadfly is the one, you see the horse's tail switch to get rid of it when the fly comes back. You're at night, you're trying to sleep in Hong Kong. It's like, mosquito, right? And then, you put your net down and one gets in the net. That's the good advisor. The net is your ego and your coverings, and the good advisor is inside the net. And so a good advisor isn't necessarily one who rubs your fur the right way or gives you honey. This is someone who's an external catalyst. A catalyst can be a powerful agent that triggers a kind of uncomfortable response. He says, we realize then, if we go on, that we've had such wisdom all along because the good advisor acts as his catalyst. And then we can overcome the languor, the kind of lack of energy we have to liberate ourselves from this problem of rebirth and death. But now he says, if you want to pull this out in one stroke, which is growing deep, it's been, covered over like lacquer layer after lacquer layer. This is not going to be a simple matter. It's not so simple. Even if you've got the good advisor, even if you have a resolve, you should recognize that you are an accomplished person. That lifetime after lifetime, you have been really building up this false self. And depending on what stage you are in life, it's probably fairly impenetrable. As you get older, it's almost impossible to ignore the information coming in. You all familiar with Thomas Kuhn's work on paradigms?
Paralysis.
Yeah. So Kuhn was a history of science person who said that we don't accumulatively grow in our knowledge of the world, but we set up views of how nature works, and we cling to those views, like the geocentric view, that the Earth is the center of the universe. And even when information comes in that counters that, we go, pay no attention. It's an irrelevant fact. And if the facts keep coming, we keep pushing them away, we stick to the paradigm that the Earth is the center of the world. Now, and then somebody gets a telescope and says, hey, there's a lot of movement and we're moving. Then you tell them to shut up. And if they don't shut up, you burn their books. So they can't get these ideas out and upset the paradigm. And if burning their books is enough, you just burn them. Okay? This is the way history of thought has worked. Until there's so much information that comes in that you have to acknowledge that the paradigm's flawed, and then he says you do a paradigm shift to a new paradigm. Oh, the Earth is the center of the universe. And so you work on that one and everything stays within that. So he said, all scientific knowledge follows these paradigm paralysis, and then when overwhelming facts come that you can no longer resist it, we reluctantly shift into a new paradigm and then tenaciously cling to that. So this is how, when we're in the paradigm paralysis of the self and what belongs to the self, when information comes in, we ignore it, right? How shall I say? A little hair falls out. Nah, big deal. Nothing wrong here. A couple cavities. Yeah, well, fill them up. Good as new. Even better, because the filling is stronger than the original, right? A little shortness of breath climbing the stairs. Yeah, I've just been eating too much, not enough sleep, right? A couple more aches and pains. Oops, major stroke. Oops, oops, oops. So pretty soon the facts come in and the paradigm paralysis starts to quaver. Me and what belongs to me is feeling less and less solid. Now, if you're 20 or 30, you're going, I don't know what he's talking about. I was just thinking of dyeing my hair. My hair is beautiful jet black. The monk and I were talking today, we're remembering this famous Jataka where the king was having his hair cut. And the hair fell as the barber cut it. And the king looked down and there was one gray hair in this jet black. And you go, whoa, and immediately brought forth the Maya Bodhi. So the one hair shattered the paradigm paralysis. He was very smart. Oh, if there's one hair, this means there's going to be more coming, right? I could kind of extrapolate and put the thing together, but we resist that. You know how much we resist aging? We spend billions of dollars to pretend that we're not getting old. I'm saying, that's rational? No, but look at this. We work out constantly in the gym. Who got immortal through working out in gyms? Do you know anybody? You can go through the graveyard, there's probably people in there who had physics and muscles and tone superior to anything I could accomplish if I worked out 24/7, and they're still dead. And there's nothing there. There's no muscle or bone. There's just a bunch of rotting. Oops. See, when we hear that, our paradigm paralysis shrinks back at this point. The house goes up again. Sometimes we fall asleep. I used to watch people fall asleep at this point in the lecture. When the master would start talking, Iche Wu Chang, everything is impermanent. Life itself is impermanent. Pile up gold and silver like a mountain. It will pass away. And all of a sudden people are because one form of paradigm paralysis is to shut down the information as it's coming in, right? That's why we go to a funeral, within 24 hours, we're good again. Ready to go. Got over that one. Come on, face reality. Oh, no. I don't want to face reality. Yes?
If that's the case, how can you rely on this inherent wisdom, though?
Meaning?
Because if we're constantly covering over, how are you going to, if the wisdom is inherent, how are you going to recognize it?
And that's the tension. That's the tension. Because inside there's also something, the seed, gnawing, wanting to come forth and sprout. There's an internal puti shin. There's an internal resolve, a heart for bodhi. There's something that wants to know. There's something that wants to understand. There's something that wants to be full and complete. We know it's there. Do we trust it enough? Probably not. But in the same way, we cannot deny it. And so the Buddha said, here's the tension. You've got this internal seed for enlightenment. And it's longing to be the light of day. It's longing. Enlightenment quest is not negative. It's not like, oh, suffering, 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 I think I should cultivate. That's only half of it. That's like the cold water on you to wake up. The real thing that drives resolve for Bodhi is the sense of wonder, the sense for wisdom, the wish to be free and liberated. It's a positive driving force, and it's more powerful than any other desire. But because we're afraid to embrace it fully, because of the self and this, we then kind of push it away. We cover it over with all these false coverings. So that's why the cultivation is called returning rather than going out. We're coming back to that again. And that's why the Buddha can stay positively. If you let go of the false, you unencumber the true, and it manifests by itself. You don't have to puff it up or inflate it. It is being suppressed by the covering. Take the covering off, and wham, it just comes forth naturally. When the mad mind stops, that very stopping is Bodhi. This is why the metaphor becomes so important. It's not like it's not there. And we think we're protecting ourselves by covering over. That's the paradox, almost the contradiction. And only if you have some experience of letting go and having that come forth, do you get the charge you need to go a little further and a little further and a little further. But trust is rewarded by knowledge, not by just trust in itself. So this is what a session is about. Okay, so the Buddha is in his family. He's the prince. He's married. Everything's set up, and he's going, I can't get into this. It's false. It's empty. It's not true. I've gone out and seen death, dying, and so on and so forth. I know this will come to me. And so he leaves behind the house. Okay? Now, chujia in Chinese means leaving home. People never think what it means. The house is the edifice of the self. It's the constructed identity that ties us into all of this. So when he says this house has been dismantled, it will not be constructed again upon his enlightenment. He's not referring to a condominium. Okay? He's referring to this delusion of a self caught up with the body and the feelings and so forth, the skandhas of the ego. So when he goes forth, only by leaving that, which we call renunciation, and I think that's a misrepresentation of what's going on here. Again, I say to you, if you take a person and put chains and anchors and weights on them and throw them into the ocean, and they cast off those chains and anchors, you say, oh, they're renouncing. No, they're not. They're liberating. They're getting free. So the Buddha saw that these chains, these shackles, klesha, and attachments, covered him over. So by leaving that space, he began to pull off the coverings and liberate that seed. And the more he let go of, the more this thing blossomed, paradoxically. Because you'd think the more that you go of, the less you have. But he said, no, it's the opposite. The more you let go of, the more you enter the fullness of your true self, your true liberation, your true independence, your true wisdom, and your true joy. So this is the paradox. So when people want to get at this, this is what a place like this is for. This is a detox center. This is a house destruction center. Okay? You can come in for 45 minutes on a Friday night and play with taking a few timbers off your side of your house or a few, shingles off the top and say, oh, gee, that's not too bad. Maybe I could take, oh, time's up. Out you go. And you build your house up again. You come back next Friday and you do a little more. You play with this back and forth. If I just sit here, I have no food, no TV, no iPod, I hear, I put it on vibration only, so I know somebody's trying to reach me, therefore I know I exist. You just turn the whole thing off. You don't think about food. You go into that space, you're actually getting into the ground of liberation again. You're going home. For 45 minutes, you kind of feel like, what is this room of my own? What is this place of my own? Unencumbered by all this. You get a little feel from that. If you go to a session, you're replicating the Buddha's experience for 7 days. For 7 days, you're unplugging, you're deconstructing, you're taking off all the supports. You're just down to food, clothes, and sleep and a shelter over your head and your own mind. Now, unfortunately, you don't get to, with one thought, I produce the entire substance manifest, because what happens then is all the habits start to come forth. You don't realize you have habits until you stop feeding them. Huh? You don't realize you have habits until you stop feeding them. Habits have to be fed. I'm not telling you anything new, right? A drug habit, an alcohol habit, a smoking habit, it has to be fed. If you don't feed it, there's withdrawal. Withdrawal is the first stage of awakening. Whoa. That's not some Buddhist 7-step program, okay? Don't get me wrong. But until you start to put down what's false, you can't pick up what's true. Until you start to withdraw from the feedings, you won't be able to feel the innate fullness of your being come forth, because you're covering it over with all this stuff. So a session, a Chan Chi, where you're holding precepts, ooh, that's a kind of withdrawal, isn't it? And you're concentrating, focusing your mind, you're not talking to a lot of people, and you're not plugged into a lot of things. All of a sudden, the habits start to come. And they don't just come, oh, you have a little habit. No, they come screaming. They're like monsters. That's why he says in the passage, it's like going against an army of demons. He's not talking about these movies, like Trilogy of the Rings, where you go up against these orcs. The demons are your own habitual tendencies, your own false thoughts, your own grasping, your own little paradigm. That's what's being challenged. So when you do a session, they come up. And that's the first sign you start to see. I am this entangled web of all this stuff. And at that point, you have the first stage of awakening, is to see what it is the covering over which you've given it. Now, if you do this for 2 weeks, it gets better. 3 weeks, it gets better. So if you have the courage and you have the ability to do one of these sessions, do it. And you will start to feel, first of all, that overwhelming sense of seeing that. But then the bit-by-bit untangling of that, leading to a kind of liberation that is beyond any liberation you'll ever experience. And the texts say that once you taste this, you'll never be satisfied by the taste of anything else. So liberating and true is this taste. So that's what meditation sessions are about. They're about putting yourself into the zone of dehabituating. But of course, you're going to feel it really intensely. I remember I told you this story of where I ran into this person where it was a small town. Everybody lived the same. Everybody was happy together. The man who ran the construction firm fell off a scaffold, broke his leg, ended up in the hospital. Good hospital, healed the leg up, patched it, should be in for 3 days and home, and he died. And there was an inquiry on why he died. Somebody was telling me this story. It's a small town in California. And the reason he died from alcohol withdrawal, DTs. Nobody was prepared. When I worked in a hospital, if somebody has a history of alcohol or whatnot, you note that on the intake. And then you're observant to watch for any sign of DTs, because you have to counter it with a dose of something that you just like, methadone for withdrawal from heroin. You counteract that with another thing, because if they go into withdrawal, they can go into total shock and can have respiratory and heart stoppage, because it's so severe to the system. Well, because nobody expected this, they just let him in his room at night. Unless he pushed his button, there was no reason. He had his dinner, watched the football game, was just lying there, but went into DTs, because now he was in 2 to 3 days without his alcohol. So when he died like this, the person I was talking to said, I lived in that town, and it was a wake-up for all of us, because we all lived the same lifestyle as this guy. We all, after work, hit the local happy hour, had 2 or 3 together. Everybody in town was there. The cops were there, construction workers, even the hospital staff. Everybody in the town had become alcoholic. But because everybody had become alcoholic, there was no contrast, and nobody knew they were alcoholic. So it was only when the alcohol was cut off in this one person did he go through, and then everybody woke up to the fact, gosh, we're probably all this way. So the Buddha, when he comes into a situation, basically sees everybody as intoxicated or asleep through this habituation, and realizes that nobody can see it. Nobody sees it because we're so immersed in it. So only if you do something like a session or start to hold precepts do you start to feel the habituation being challenged a little bit. And you don't know what I'm talking about. I mean, it's like this summer at the session, we had somebody who came up and they weren't going to get enlightened. They weren't going to become a bodhisattva. They weren't even become a first stage arhat. Their goal for the week was to quit smoking. Okay, this is somebody from local. And he came up and he made it through, I don't know, how many days, Stacy, did he make it? 5? Made it through 5 days. So he had the courage to go for 5 days. And on the night of the 5th day, the demon armies came, the habitual, and of course, right at that day, I think there's some passage in the Shurangama that talked about this, so it really brought it in, that we cover over this wonderful brightness through habitual energy and whatnot. All of that together just got him so anxious, he couldn't take it, and so he sneaked out at night for a cigarette. So then I get a call late at night, I don't know who it was, somebody saying, oh, we got him down at the ER, it's really a bad scene. James, you were there, right? Yeah. And let me see if he went out and he went into a place that was going to be dark to smoke. He heard something and thought it was either an animal. You know, if you're not used to being out in nature, everything's a monster. Okay. Now there's no monsters up in Ukiah, but late at night, if you're used to being in a city, you hear a little rustling in the leaves. It's got to be a monster or a werewolf or something. Or, even worse, he thought it was one of the monks who would catch him breaking the rules. And so he started to run. And of course, he tripped and fell down and just massively on the concrete and asphalt, you know, and just tore himself all up. And now he would have stayed there because at that time of night, everybody goes to sleep. You know, nobody pays attention to anything. He's laying there. He can't get up. He can't walk. He's bleeding. He's going, oh, geez. I mean, the stuff that's going through his mind is crumpled cigarette is there. And there's nobody, and he doesn't have his cell phone because he lost it when he fell. Fortunately, for some reason, one of the monks was late coming back. And now you have to imagine the monks walking back. Oh, they go, help me. They're like, what is this? So, fortunately, he didn't run. Because, you know, he's like, must be a demon coming to tempt me. Run away. And the guy would have died probably. So he found him, and you took him to the hospital, right? Doug took him to the hospital.
We called an ambulance, actually.
What's that?
The ambulance took him to the hospital.
Okay. An ambulance finally took him to the hospital. When he came back, we were all worried, you know, well, there wasn't enough lights. He's going to sue us, blah, 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 you know. And the reality was, he says, wow, that's just wonderful, this cause and effect thing. And he was very honest. He said, you know, I really was humbling to see that even getting a hold on a habit like that is most difficult. And he said, and so I made a vow, like a precept, not to do it. And now I understand when you make precepts and vows, you're actually committed. And there's effects if you break them. And so he completely internalized the whole experience to be an awakening thing for him, not only to humble himself to how deeply he was attached to the cigarette, but to realize when he sets its mind to changing how difficult that is and what the consequences are of not following through. And so, in a sense, it was a kind of awakening for him. But if you see that with smoking or cigarettes or alcohol or drugs, that's nothing compared to habituation of the ego and breaking that habit. Now that's something that's a little more challenging and subtle. So Han Shan tonight then, as we finish up this, says, unless you're a person of immense strength, able to shoulder a heavy burden and pierce to the heart of the matter with a single saber thrust. Now, again, forget the martial aspect of this, it's metaphorical, right? This task will be extremely difficult. The ancients compared it to, quote, a lone warrior going into battle against 10,000 enemies. These are no mere empty words. Now know that this is metaphor. The 10,000 enemies are actually what we think are our friends. They're the ego and all the supports we've given to the ego over time. And so when you turn on those, they become as if enemies. but they're not true friends. This is the meaning. This quote is actually coming out of the Sutra in 42 sections. There's an actual passage in the Sutra 42 sections that talks about someone who goes forth in this way and begins to cultivate will then meet up very quickly with those habituated tendencies. And each one of them will be like a warrior that you encounter that you have to defeat. This is all inner metaphor for what's going on. It's greed, it's anger, it's jealousy, it's envy. It's wanting of food, clothes, sex, and sleep. It's all these things that we have built up to call me and mine that make us feel like we're, each one of these has to be seen through and put down to get to the true self. But we've created them in such a way as, you know, I was thinking of that shrine in China. Who was the emperor that they uncovered the clay terracotta warriors? Remember? Right. Right. So you can see him, even in death, wanting to surround himself with things that would protect the self and what belongs to self. So these terracotta warriors are, in a sense, projections of that ego. And in the same way, these enemies, we have our own projections. We're all emperors unto ourselves. And we have these projections of warriors, terracotta or otherwise, that we surround ourselves with. To get to the true self, each one of these has to be taken out, taken down. And that's the psychological process of self-liberation. But it's very difficult. And the thing is, even no therapist can do this for you or help you with. This is not a therapeutic kind of thing, which is aimed at the full realization of yourself. This is about getting to a deeper self that's beyond what even psychotherapy talks about. So that's why this is a very profound psychological text, and it's got all the things we need to enact it. The only thing is just picking it up and doing it. So it's really wonderful. Next week, we're done for tonight. Next week, he's going to talk about you're here, you're ready to take on the warriors, you're all set to go, but make sure you have the right method. You have to have a correct method. It's like anything else, it's a high art, whether it's medicine or music. Without the correct method, you won't penetrate. So one of my teachers once said, in order to be good at anything, you have to have a good teacher, you have to be able to work hard, and you have to have a true or proper thing that you're working on. If you work hard and have a good teacher, but your fundamental art is flawed, you'll never tone, you'll never penetrate. If you have a good art and you work hard, but without the guidance of the teacher, you still won't. So you need all three. So he's giving us the teaching, he's giving us everything we need, but the method now is the most important. And what he's going to explain in the next class we get to is how people either misapply the method when it's true or get a wrong method. And that's the next part coming up. So this is why I really like this text. It's very straightforward. But anyhow, any questions? We went over tonight. I'm sorry.
What's the difference between a good teacher, work hard, and good art?
The art itself, the discipline itself, the method itself has to be true and proper, right? So you can work hard and you can have a good teacher, but you can have a discipline that's not a true discipline. It's off in some way. For example, in medicine, it's not real medicine, it's quackery. So you have a good quackery teacher, you work hard, but you never become a good doctor because the actual theory and the methods that you were learning were not correct, right? So it's like that. Questions, announcements? Yes?
Well, it all seems so serious. I mean, and I know it is, but I just wonder where sort of the joy is or enjoyment of life comes in.
It's serious, but that doesn't mean it's without joy. I don't know if that's a good answer for you. Serious does not have to mean without joy. And the joy comes from the untying, the unpacking. In other words, yes, there's difficulty. Yes, it's hard. But the rewards are immediate and the joy is immediate. So every little bit that you put down, a corresponding joy arises. And that's why joy is essential to this. But it's not to be mistaken for fun or lightheartedness. Because often that's a covering for getting at real joy. It's a superficial kind of quick fun. This fun is the fun that's coming from a deep untangling. It's sort of like when you really find what it is you're meant to do in life, and it took some serious probing to get there, there's a joy that comes every day. It's deep because you're doing what you're not laughing, you're not giggling, whatnot. But there's a fullness of joy that comes from being who you are, where you're supposed to be. That's the joy that's being talked about here, rather than a momentary lightness or a momentary high. There's a deep, profound joy that comes from this liberation. And that's what they say, that's that taste, that once you get that taste, you'll never, by any other taste, be made happy again. So one of the marks of this is a kind of permanence, a purity, a true self, and bliss. So bliss is the fourth component that comes with this liberation, if that makes sense. The humor, or the other kind of joy is humor, and that's what you have to do this. In other words, to penetrate these demons, you have to have a sense of humor. And the sense of humor comes from having a sense of irony about your own self. So while you're engaging in this, I often think of humor as a seventh paramita. There's six paramitas, but humor, and my teacher used humor all the time in order to break the tension that can come from the serious undertaking, and to get you to relax, because sometimes you become so attached to that you then take the actual work that you're doing as another ego substitute. I'm seriously engaged. I'm a Dharma practitioner. It's like, okay, now you've done another thing. You've made your ego identity around that. I am the renunciator par excellence. And now the ego is around that one. So that's why the Buddha had to warn, even the teaching itself can become an attachment if you don't use it correctly. And that's where humor would come in. So if you can generate yourself, that's good. If you need a good advisor to give humor, that's also good. But there wasn't a day that went by in our cultivation that there wasn't humor. And usually it was self-liberating humor. There was a lot of laughter, and it wasn't comedic laughter. It was laughter at the deeper aspects of this and how we get attached to cultivation and so forth. Okay, yes.
So
I saw your hand starting to.
Yeah, earlier you mentioned about this political debate. So we are right in the midst of this election time. So.
And are you talking about self-cultivation, or are you talking about something?
No. I'm talking about, like, in reality, we, like you're right, like we come here for 45 minutes and we go home, but then you got immersed into this we call it real world stuff, right? I don't know. It's just so, but it's kind of like you see things happening in front of your face. They are really phony.
They're really
phony, like they are not real.
Oh.
Like, but it's what everybody's buying into, though. That's the sad thing, right? Like the debate and both sides analyze, and so you get this point, you get that point.
There's no end to the illusory phoniness of everything that we surround ourselves with. But addressing that before addressing this not only isn't very productive, but sometimes a cop-out. So what the Buddha was saying, of course, phoniness, pretense, covering over, extends. I mean, we're sitting here tonight. Did you listen to the sound over there? Or something? No, it wasn't Samadhi. Well, over there at Berkeley High, there was a cosmic event going on. The most important event of the week, a sporting event on that field. And that announcer's voice was pumping through that speaker. Yes, indeed. And you're going, God, it's like a little fart. But for the people there, it wasn't a fart. It was real. How's that different than the Super Bowl? Well, no, the Super Bowl, that's big time. But that's not, no, it's the same stuff. Every event, every conditioned Dharma, the Buddha says, is like this. Now, on one perspective, we see it as unreal and phony, and it is. But we think the one that we're in is not. You know, no, I'm in the Super Bowl, you know. It's not geocentric, it's not, you know, sun-centric, it's egocentric. So none of us stand outside our own field and observe it in the same way we observe that and say, well, how silly, that's a high school game. Cheerleaders are jumping up and down, tomorrow they'll all be gone, they'll grow up and move on to another field. Unlike us, the field we're in right now. Every field I've ever been in was cosmically centered and important. Only after I left it did I realize, no, really, that was kind of fart. So the Buddha once, you know, implicated that if you can see your realm right now as fart while you're in it, that's the beginning of a kind of wisdom. And then the disentanglement. So yes, it's true, it's everywhere. That's when the Buddha said the whole world is on fire, he meant it's all on fire because it's all coming from the same human mind. So whether it's just a little household dream world constructed on pretense and phoniness, I'm the head of the house, you know, you children are the blah, 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 or it's a whole country, or it's the UN, it's the same dynamics that are going. It's the same reflection of the same mind. It's just a difference of degree, not kind. And that's part of awakening, is to see that, but not just be thinking that there's not something potentially true, because behind that is human beings just like ourselves, there's the same potential. So we're all caught up in the same, you know, there's no end to it. It's just a matter of time, but you become much more effective if you see through your own. And then you have much more cred when you present the other. But to stand on one side and say, that's phony, but what I'm doing, you know, then it becomes, there's no cred, there's kind of a disingenuousness. So I agree. But I don't know what's real. Is that real? And this isn't tonight? You know, from the perspective there, if you called Obama and Mitt up and said, something real is happening in Berkeley at the monastery. People are sitting and they're looking into the nature of their minds and getting past their falseness. Like, what are you bothering me with? That is so insignificant. But what they feel they're doing is totally cosmically significant. Now, if one of them just died on the platform, which could happen, or an earthquake opens up the debate scene and they just swallow it up and say, oh, how important was that exactly? If one of them gets a stroke, how important is all of that? Dream, illusion, bubble, shadow, but we don't realize it until it actually fades from our grasp. While we're clinging to it, we think it's absolutely real. So, I don't know where real is exactly. I'm still looking, but I know it's not in externals, and even internally, you got to be really careful when you're finding what's real there. Yeah, so it's all good. Any announcements? 1, 2. Okay, Jason.
I'm not sure if it's the same announcement. Okay, there's actually 2 announcements. Tomorrow there's a Blues Global Relief and at San Francisco, starting at 12:30, is doing a Walk to Feed the Hungry. It's kind of a fundraising event where people can participate by walking for, how long is it? Like 4 miles, so it's relatively short in San Francisco. It starts in Chinatown.
Well, it all depends on your point of view, man. That's a marathon for me.
Yeah. So you can find out more detail by going to their website, which is Buddhist Global Relief, and just Google that. Am I missing any details? Or is that good?
I thought it was 1 o'clock.
Is it 1 o'clock?
Registration is at 12. The walk begins at 1 p.m.
Okay.
And then if you guys want to detox, there is a Paul Guanyin session that's on October 28th. You should check that out.
So there's a Guanyin session starting October 28th, which is a wonderful opportunity to do 7 days of just joy and liberation and facing no bad habits, right? Yeah. If you have a chance to do it, I would say do it. Don't let it go by and think I'll do it next year or the year after.
October 28th.
October 28th.
How would you find out more information about it?
drbu.org.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, one more thing.
Well, okay, go. Did he cover what you wanted to cover?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a sign-in sheet. So if you want to get the updates of the class or some events, you are welcome to leave your email. So a lady called Angela Justice, she'll send out the updates like every 2 or 3 weeks. So it's a very low frequency email list, so don't worry about that. I won't try to fill out your inbox. So.
And some people have asked about getting copies either of the Han Shan material or some of the quote passages that have been put up. So, Locke, I think you have the master of that?
Yeah.
You have everything? So if somebody wrote him on an email and said, would then he send it to you? I don't know how this works.
Sure.
So if there's any quotes that you've seen passages we put up, or the Han Shan material to date that you want to have for your own study, but please understand this is really a rough thing in process. It's not ready for publication, and we'd like to, when we're done, do the whole thing as one publication. So it's basically for your own use. Okay, and some of you have been sending me comments on either the English or the Chinese. Or challenging some of the foolish things I say, and I welcome all of that in that order. And if I don't respond, it doesn't mean you're right and I'm wrong, or I'm wrong and you're right. It might mean I'm just too busy. But I do appreciate your input and questions. It really helps refine the class, what we're doing. So we'll do the transference.
Our eyes as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace, with hearts of goodness, goodness and right. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our joy to bring compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Ding.